The European Union is seeking to shield its digital regulations from U.S. scrutiny as both sides finalize a detailed statement to formalize last month's trade deal. EU officials say disputes over language on non-tariff barriers contributes to factors delaying the joint statement. Now, according to the Financial Times, the joint statement had originally been expected shortly after the July announcement by EU President Ursula von der Leyen and U.S. President Donald Trump. Now, for more on these stories, Eizu Uwaoma, who is founder and managing director of Xavier Consulting, joins me now to discuss this further. Good morning to you, Eizu. Many thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you, and it's great to have you on here. Let's begin with the EU-US trade standoff over this digital laws. In what ways can these rules reshape trade relations with the US and global tech firms?
First, strategically, I think that the internet never forgets, and somebody has to be in charge of determining who remembers, right? That's the truth about it. It's a real concern, and EU is taking one step, but the consequences of that is paving the way for other countries and other continents as well to start creating laws. If that happens, then the biggest losers, like you know, will be the big tech giants, which are mostly American companies, Amazon, Google, Meta. Those are like the biggest losers in that. I think the three consequences will be: one, they set the pace for other people to start making those type of laws, right, from Latin America to even Africa. Second thing is that they have to restructure their algorithm and their processes to adapt to that. In the end, it's about privacy. It's about accountability of where our data goes. And I think that it's a step in the right direction. My fear is the body language of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the king of retaliations. So he's going to obviously try to retaliate back to the EU. And that's the point. But let's not forget that the fundamental of the internet is built on open source. You don't want to polarize different regions. So you now have a Facebook for EU and then a Facebook for the rest of the world, right? And that's something that doesn't help. It's a game of regulation versus innovation. That's always been a long lifetime fight. Innovation is always ahead of regulations, and that's another thing that's happening. So let's hope that regulation plays catch up and reduces that gap. I think it's a step in the right direction. In their local grounds, right, American legislatures would also probably do a copycat and say, if these laws apply in Europe, then why doesn't it apply in America? So that might also have us have a lot of the sanctions. It's now looking like, as things change, everything remains the same. We've seen this happen before with Meta, and then it's going to happen again. So everybody will have to upgrade their laws in the end, and then the users also have got to have more confidence. But more importantly, losers here would always be the practitioners and the players, in my own opinion. So I guess they'll have to adjust. At the end of the P&L is reduced revenue, in my own opinion, for the biggest players, Meta, Twitter, the likes of Amazon and co.
Right. Potential retaliation, of course, is a legitimate concern. Let's just hope that it doesn't get to that point. Let's look next at Air Canada's strike ground in flights. What does the strike reveal about labor tensions within the aviation sector and, of course, a wider economic fallout?
It's not the first time it's happening. Once again, we're back to precedents, right? Lufthansa had done that in recent times. And the reality about it is strikes are fundamental. Sometimes the best way to tell your employer that you're working is to stop work. And that's what they're doing. What they're asking for is sane, is very understandable. However, they need to also understand the reality on ground. Like I said the last time I came here, the aviation industry in the last 5 years post-COVID, I describe it as the guys that juggle knives in a hurricane and still have to smile while they're doing that. Aviation is not in its all-time high. Airlines are struggling. That's the truth. Airplanes are not cheap. But then again, when people strike, it shows you that the biggest machine is still humans because the planes will move themselves. My challenge now is that if they get away with it, other airlines would also have their air hostesses and all of their staff go on strike, and that creates a whole ripple effect. And you can see what's happening with even Qantas and the rest of Australia. I think they have the same. They're almost going towards that path. So the reality about it is that, in my own opinion, Canada has lost a lot of money because it's their original, it's their number one airline, it's the national carrier. And also the passengers have lost a lot of money because there's a lot of rescheduled flights, there's a lot of refunding and all that has happened. But that's what business is about. There's ups and there's down. We hope that they negotiate better. It's a conflict, and the ultimate goal of conflict in diplomacy is not victory, it's progress. So I hope they can sit together and make progress. At the end of the day, post-COVID, people are stressed. Talk about aviation. You see what's happened with the airlines in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks in Nigeria. It's the same thing. People are stressed. These staff are demanding for better work for the stress that they go through, right? And I think it's a decent thing. They just need to explain to them the impact of that on their P&L.
I'm glad you mentioned Qantas because, as we know, concurrently they've been hit with a heavy fine to the tune of about $58 million US dollars, 90 in Australian dollars. So that's something else to watch. Let's move on to US retail sales rising by 0.5% in July. Does this signal strong consumer resilience?
Well, that's how it should look. But if you look at it more intelligently, not exactly. And I'll tell you why. Yes, there's an increase and spike in consumer spending, but consumer spending in an economy like America that is credit-driven could mean more credits, right? So you might be spending money on credits, right? Balling on borrowed funds. I think that might be the case. And also, I also think that if you look at the fundamental and dynamics of what they're spending money on, is really shopping and food. Americans eat out a lot. I'm not sure it means progress when people spend more money, right? It also might also mean that it's a coping mechanism. You know, retail, people shop as a therapy, if you know what I mean. So the truth about it is I'm not sure it will be right correlation to say that that's a good signal that the economy, because inflation is still on the rise, in my own opinion. So no, I don't think that's the issue.
So are you saying it's masking deeper economic weakness?
Deeper. Yes, it's probably credit-driven. It's probably credit-driven, in my own opinion, first of all, right? And so they're not spending money. And then, in my own opinion, too, it might also mean, in more ways than one, that they're just spending money as a reflex. So we wait for another few months to see whether the borrowed money is paid back if they're spending on credit, because credit cards are credits. So we need to understand that fundamentally.
All right. Well, let's look next at Senate Democrats opposing AI chip sales to China. Where exactly should the line be drawn between security and profit here with the story?
So I can understand American standpoints, right? Especially to China. You know, China has won the trade war. China makes the goods, but Americans make the rule. I like to think of it that way. So America would hold forth to what their strength is, which is basically making these rules. Selling chips to China, your biggest competitor, like you being in war and you're selling fuel or jet fuel to the rockets that would come back at you, right? You're fueling your own, and that's really what the challenge is. I think I understand American standpoint on that, and of course driven by Democrats. One thing I think can happen in more technically is to control the type of chips that they sell, right? Chips that help produce consumer electronics, yes. Chips that help create weapons, probably a bit lesser. That's on one end. Now, if they win and they sell lesser chips to China, what that also means that China would most likely build internal capabilities, right? I have fears. China in the world has been the best copycats. Teach China something, they do it better than you. That's what I mean. I was telling someone joking that China beats America in NBA now. Who would think that that's even possible? Americans invented basketball. So China's are great innovators. They're not great inventors. They're great innovators. They take an idea and they expand it. So I think I understand America's standpoint. I think chips, in the 20th century, what just happened in the 20th century was steel and oil wars. 21st century is wars around algorithms, data, and chips. So we understand that standpoint. If I was America, I would do the same. You cannot fuel your own rivalry, in my own opinion.
So this is strictly from a very protectionist stance.
Yes, it's absolutely.
As one would understand, is what you're saying. Let's round up with Trump's tariff plans on steel and chips. How will this reshape U.S. manufacturing in terms of a strain on global supply chains?
Well, it's also very similar to the last question, in my own opinion, because the truth about it is, steel and chips are raw materials. Let's look at it that way. And what are they used for? And that's another thing you want to look at, right? So increase in tariff, yes, helps, right? Especially helps with how America is trying to mop up money for fiscal spending, right? Fiscal policy, how they intend to mop up money. Of course, tariff means better inflow in terms of revenue to the country. So it's a win for macroeconomics, but a loss for microeconomics. That's the economics of companies and consumers, right? Because don't forget that if America says, oh, we're going to increase more tariffs, what it means is that a lot of the productions that happen in America, right, of course, end users, that would have more challenge. Like two elephants are fighting. At the end of the day, the grass is suffering. Now, two world powers are fighting. It's the consumers that are the grass in this point that are suffering. First thing that was going to happen is going to be a spike in things like cars, right? Because don't forget, steel, a major use of steel is production of cars, right? So you're going to see a higher cost of price per unit for cars, right? And of course, a lot more other things. Of course, the other one in terms of chips would now be electronics. So also expect larger increase in pricing or price tags for things like your gadgets, right? Your electronics. So in the end, it's really a game of macroeconomics versus microeconomics, right? It's an interesting conversation. You see, the trade wars and all these things. One thing we don't realize about it is that is either letting the factory win versus letting the people win, right? And it's really your choice in the end, right? People like Intel, right, for chips, people like NVIDIA, these are standard classic American companies. I don't know how they feel about it, but in the end, right, one of the most important things here is all of these things in the end are all conflicts. Like I always say, and it's one of my central ideology of life, conflicts, the ultimate goal should never be victory, right? That's ego. The ultimate goal should be progress. Let's make sure that everybody wins.
Absolutely. So either way, there is going to be that spillover effect that cannot be avoided. If you joined us midway, I've been chatting with Eizu Uwaoma, who is founder and managing director of Xavier Consulting. Eizu, always a pleasure to have you, and I will see you again very soon.